Welcome to the Renegade Nutrition Podcast, where we discuss all things wellness.
I'm Eleni Welch, nutritionist.
And I'm Kay Boyer, health enthusiast.
Welcome back, Renegades. It is great to have you all here today. We have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Jeff Crippen. He is a certified naturopath, and he practices chiropractic and nutrition in the small town of St. Joe in Texas. And we're super excited to have him on the show today. We, as you may notice, do not have Kay with us today, my usual co-host. She had a market pop-up that she needed to go to, so she won't be with us, but it'll be Dr. Jeff and I promise we will do our best to be as entertaining as we can without Kay here. I'm sure we'll nerd out a lot deeper. Kay usually takes us back to earth. I'll do my best to look at it from the perspective of the layperson. So Dr. Jeff, welcome to the Renegade Nutrition Podcast. And we're super excited about talking with you today, specifically about the placebo effect and what it can tell us about optimal health, which is a topic I can't wait to dive into. Before we do, I'd love to just have you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to become a naturopath and how you started practicing chiropractic and nutrition. Just a little bit of that journey for our listeners to know the person.
Sure. Thank you so much, Eleni. Thanks for the invitation. And so my journey started as a child with approximately zero interest in health and interest in playing basketball and sports with my friends. It's kind of where it started. The closest I got to it was when I went to give blood at one point. You know, you have to fill out the little paperwork, and the lady slides the plastic thing open and gives you the sheet and then slides it over and takes it back. Well, I gave it back, and she calls me up and she says, "Son, I think I know what you're going to be when you get older." And I was like, you know what? I was at the point of astronaut was kind of like where my head was at that point in my life. But she goes, "You're going to be a doctor." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because I can't read anything you wrote." And that was the closest anybody got to predicting I was going to be here today. So how that happened, or part of that story, is about 6 years old, I started getting my first headache. They got worse for a couple years to the point it was daily headaches. Eventually went to pediatrician a few times, over-the-counter medication, prescription drugs. Then they said, hey, progressively worsening headaches in a young child that don't respond to medications are a potential red flag symptom. So they did a CT scan of my head. They wanted to rule out, the bad things like an infection, like a tumor, like cancer, and things of that nature. They found something in my head. So then they did an MRI. Then I met with a neurologist and then found out it was not a cancerous, but there was a mass in my head. Anyway, talked through surgery. They decided not to do surgery, and I'm quite thankful for that. But I remember sitting in the neurosurgeon's office when he said they weren't going to do surgery. And I remember my mood, which was, disappointed. I'd been trained even as a kid at 7 or 8 years old that, the doctor points and says, this is what's wrong and we can fix it. Mm-hmm. And even at that point in my journey, I was just a couple years in and just frustrated that nobody could tell me why I had the headache.
Yeah.
Right? Many doctors offered solutions. Take this pill, try this drug, do this, do that. And then some nice-minded people would say, coffee's good for headaches. And then other people would say, don't drink coffee. It's not good for your head. And I was like, I'm 8. I'm not drinking coffee, Right. And then they'd have the conversation around what red wine's good for the head, or red wine can cause headaches. And I'm like, I'm 12 at this point. That wasn't super, super helpful. But the point was there was tons of interventions that were proposed that ultimately didn't work, but I never met someone who could tell me why I had the headache. And that was really the genesis of the issue. At its worst, I had a headache for 2 years, nonstop, every moment, every day. Wow. So, it changed. It was, it was kind of my life, kind of dragged yourself through school, come home, lay on the couch. This is late 90s. I'm eating no sugar, no dairy, which wasn't the easiest thing at the time. Right. So I'm cooking myself dinner, if I couldn't eat what my mom and dad, if I couldn't eat what the family was having, and then I go back to the couch and lay down and try to do 20 minutes of homework and then go back to bed. And that was kind of rinse and repeat for a couple of years. So
that is awful.
It's a little hard to connect back to what that was. I have the memory of it, but it was a little over 20 years ago for me now. But yeah, it was like, I wasn't going out with friends on a Friday night. I wasn't playing sports. I wasn't even talking to some of my family. I had a couch that I laid on a lot in kind of a tremendous amount of pain. And that was kind of where it was. And at some point, you kind of look around and I did, and it's like, what I'm doing isn't living.
Right.
Like, just a couple years of just throbbing and pain and layers of headaches. And sometimes you get the migraine or you're nauseous and sensitivity to light. But just all the time, it's just like just getting punched and punched and punched. And, it just, I decided I wasn't going to go on living like that. And, that can take a couple different options on how you do it.
Right.
And, so I had some thoughts. I was actually put on an antidepressants to help with the headaches, which turns out didn't help. But it was one called Elavil that now has a black box warning on it that increases suicidal ideation in children.
Yeah.
So thankfully, I was able to talk to my doctor and get off it because I knew I didn't feel like myself when I was on it. But when I see that black box warning on a antidepressant for children, I can very much relate to what that means.
Right.
Because I live those thoughts. So anyway, I decided I'm not going to go on living like this. And I didn't know what that meant at that time, but what it ended up meaning was I'm going to figure out a way to solve this or find someone who can help me solve it. Or I didn't want to think about what that other option was.
Right.
But that's kind of how it began. And that was 25 years ago. And eventually, went to college. Still wasn't planning on getting into healthcare. And till about my second year, I took a class in the medical school, medical physiology, just for fun. Like all these people were stressed out and it's like pre-med and they got to get their good grades and do all this stuff and they're all freaking out. And I was like, I took it as an elective. Like I was just interested. Like that's the level I was at, trying to like just study health. And then I realized, well, if I just took this as an elective, maybe this is, and I did well. I enjoyed it. I felt like, yeah, this is what I enjoy studying. I said, well, this is probably a sign. So I ended up majoring in Spanish so I could get out of school as quickly as possible, and went to chiropractic school and did all the prereqs on my way, and got a degree along the way as a certified traditional naturopath, and then have been in practice now after helping others for about 12 years.
Wow. And so with the headaches as a kid, did you end up seeing a chiropractor? Did they end up helping you along that journey? What made you kind of decide on the chiropractic route?
Yeah, great. So I saw a lot of people on that journey. As you can imagine, I got regular craniosacral therapy. I saw acupuncturists. I did some Chinese herbs. This is after doing, a dozen to 18 different medical doctors with a whole collection of drugs. Specifically as chiropractic, what I found is when I had the headaches, and I got a chiropractic adjustment, the headache would be less intense. So it would improve. I didn't find it was taking it away, but I found it was helping.
Yeah.
Which made me happy and curious to find more. And then it was once I found a chiropractor who really added that holistic functional nutrition with it, that I was rebuilding my body from the inside out, as well as aligning the spine and nervous system. That was really the change point for me. So it was that experience that really led me to chiropractic school and to focus on so much of my time and effort in nutrition, partly because I'd already studied it so much to help myself.
Right.
And partly because I just enjoyed learning about it and found it an incredibly effective way to help others kind of live their best life.
Amazing. And today, do you still have the headaches? Are you headache free? What's life look like?
Yeah, I mean, for the last 10 years, almost never have a headache.
Wow.
And if I do, I can spot what exactly it's from. And actually now what I can feel more from is I can spot the stressor it comes from.
Yeah.
Often like a non-physical stressor, a tough day at work or working with a client through something really tough. Sometimes I can feel that. But in terms of the physical, almost never have one. I mean, to the point I can't even really relate to myself 25 years ago and kind of what I was going through.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's insane.
Yeah, I couldn't work out without pain. I couldn't play sports. I couldn't lift. I couldn't walk without pain. I mean, it's just the life doesn't connect at all to what that is. So knock on wood, we've been good for about the last 15 years around that, which has been just an incredible blessing and a great
That's
thing.
amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. I that story is so near and dear to my heart because I dealt with chronic headaches as well myself for only 3 years compared to your decades of pain. And in that time, I would get migraines a couple times a week. And I just, when you're talking about your journey to figure out what's going on and trying all of the different modalities, wow, I can just so relate to that because I remember my husband and I probably spent, I would guess, close to $10,000 between doctor's appointments and trying different therapies, doing allergy testing, doing hormone panels, you name it, doing heavy metal toxicity testing, seeing all the specialists, just trying to get to the root of what was causing it. And I can so vividly remember the frustration of it. But like you share also, I can't go back to what life was like living like that now that I've been free of that. Anyway, I know how just totally debilitating that can be. We even waited an extra year or so to try and have children because of it, because I was worried I wouldn't be able to care for a child. So, wow, I can really relate to how that affects your life. And I'm so happy you found a solution, and not only found a solution, but now you're dedicating your life to helping others find a life that's free from pain and illness and sickness, which is, I think one of the greatest things we can aspire to here on earth. Obviously, I'm a nutritionist, so I think that that's important, but it really is such a calling. And so, wow, awesome. Good for you. What an inspirational story and turnaround. Tell me a little bit, we're going to dive into the placebo effect. And so I want to know,
just as we jump, can I ask one question just before we jump in there? Can you tell me what was the key things that you found on your 3-year journey, and what helped really turn the tide for you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. This is an unusual answer. It was actually my teeth. So, I went to a biological dentist. I ended up finding a biological dentist who could do a type of x-ray called a cone beam scan. And he was able to look for something that they call cavitations, which is not a term I learned that dentists in the conventional practice are familiar with. So I needed to find a specialized dentist. And it was actually at the suggestion of a chiropractor that I even looked into that as a potential source of the problem, because he had, in speaking with him, he said, if somebody really doesn't have success with chiropractic, with the acupuncture, with massage therapy, with the hormone panels, with food sensitivity testing, I oftentimes start looking at the teeth. And he said, you should go find a biological dentist. This is a thing that could be going on. And of course I looked into it because I'd never heard of it before, asked my regular dentist about it. She looked at me like I had 3 heads. And so I said, okay, I really am going to have to go find a biological dentist. I ended up finding a dentist in our area who we've interviewed on this podcast. His name is Dr. Cody Kriegel. And funny enough, I went to college with him. So
oh my gosh.
I knew he was pre-med. I didn't know he was becoming a dentist at the time. So I ended up seeing him at his practice. He was a biological dentist, did the scan. He did the cone beam scan and found that I had the cavitations from having my wisdom teeth pulled. And so the traditional, when I was 16, at least the way they traditionally did is they pull wisdom tooth and then they cauterize the roots of where the tooth was, and it cuts off the blood supply to the area. And so your body does not have a way of fighting and removing any infection or bacterial buildup that occurs in the area. And over time, if there's infection, if there's bacteria, they can actually start to eat away at your jawbone and at the surrounding tissues, and it creates more and more infection. And you have all of these meridians and all of these nerves that run through this area of infection. And this is literally, we've been trying things for 3 years, right? And so when we're talking about this, I have zero expectations that it's going to work. Zero. Because everybody had told me they could help me and nobody had. So I went into that surgery they open up the site, they clean out the infection, they actually inject your own stem cells back in to help the tissue and the bone regrow, to hopefully help the blood vessels regrow so that your body can access that area, continue to keep it infection free. yeah, zero expectations that it was going to change anything, but went through it because there are other health problems associated with having infection in your jaw, and so I thought it was worth looking into. And coming out of that surgery, I remember, a few days went past and I'm waiting for the first headache and nothing. And then a week went past, and then 2 weeks went past, and then 3 weeks went past. Wow. Oh my God, I could cry just talking about it because I remember how much it totally is. It does. I mean, I would come home from work and just lay down and go to bed for the night. That was pretty much it, because I wasn't hungry. I'd be nauseous to the point of wanting to throw up. And so I didn't want to eat anything. And all I could do was lay down in a cold room, dark, blackout blinds down, something over my eyes, ice packs. That was how I lived for years. So yeah, now it's like you, if I get a headache, and they're rare, if I get one, I can actually attribute it to what it's coming from. Whereas before, we never could know what was triggering them. And the biggest trigger for me today is stress. And I know when I'm stressed out or really upset about something, it can trigger a headache. So
then, like you're saying, it's the anxiety of living life, never knowing exactly when that headache's going to strike.
Yeah.
Like, I've got to do this. I've got outside projects. I've got to care for kids. I've got this homework thing. I've got this stuff. And it's like, you never know when something could strike, and you could be out for 2 hours or 2 days or 3 days. Right. So you're kind of always like somebody with ulcerative colitis, like on the idea of a road trip. It's like, you're always looking like, when's it going to strike? Where's the closest just that constant anxiety that you're just kind of living with, of just, when is this going to strike, and when am I just going to be knocked out, and what are the consequences of that? So it's an emotional, mental kind of strain it puts on the body as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that was it.
Oh, great. That's fantastic. Yeah. It's dentistry is, and then we'll go on to the next beat, but dentistry is interesting because it's one of the rare places where it's like normal to leave dead tissue in the body.
Right.
If you look at like a root canal or something else, and basically what you're describing is a part of the body that's dead, cauterized, which means basically burned.
Yeah.
No blood vessels in there, and it's basically just rotting and decomposing. And just the idea that, it's the idea of, holism. Can you see the whole person or just a piece?
Right.
And as most dentists look at things as just a tooth, but if you look at you as a whole person, the question of why would we leave dead or dying tissue in a human body is a curious one to think about.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
But it's so commonly done. And anyway, so glad you found the answer and found Cody and got that done. But yeah, I love biological dentists. They see the whole body as connected to the teeth, and they don't just look at mouth, they look at the whole person. So I love that philosophy, and I found that super, super useful for stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So cool. Yeah. Well, let's dive into our topic of today, the placebo effect. I want to know, first of all, and you can approach this topic however you want, but I do want to know what interested you in discussing this topic of the placebo effect. And maybe we could start by, I'm sure everybody it's one of those terms that gets thrown around so often. I think people hear it and think they know what it means without even truly knowing what it means. So even taking it back to basics, can you explain really what the placebo effect is, what that means, and why it's a topic of interest to you?
Yeah, so I think that's a really great question to start with. For me, you hear about something like antidepressants, and some people have great experiences on them. Some people notice nothing. Mm-hmm. And you wonder if it's the same drug, why is it having such radically different effects person to person?
Right.
And then you hear this idea like, well, the placebo effect is basically, and to define that, a placebo is basically taking an inert substance, colloquially, it's a sugar pill, but basically taking a sugar pill and comparing that to a drug. And you want to see, does the drug work better than the sugar pill? If so, the drug works, quote unquote, or the herb or the intervention or whatever you're studying, or is there really no difference between the two, which means the drug or the intervention or the herb is basically just no better than a sugar pill, right? So every drug that comes to market, when it goes to FDA approval, they compare it to a placebo. They do clinical trials on it. but what fascinated me was 30% of the people who get a placebo, can be up to 80%, but let's call it 30% of the people who get a placebo get better, even though they didn't take anything.
Right.
Which to me is just, it's a fascinating thing. And I think it's a fascinating thing for a couple different reasons. One is we are literally, number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States is medical bills, right? We are literally, we can look at Medicare, we can look at, just the healthcare spending in this country, the cost of corporations, the cost of family. I mean, it's years ago, it was over $8,000 per person per year.
Wow.
That was spent in the United States, and we're more than twice as much as any other country. And the last time they measured, our health outcomes were roughly 43rd in the world, which we were like third among countries that started with the word United, right? Behind United Arab Emirates, in the UK, United Kingdom. So, we're spending a lot of money, but we're not getting great results. So I was curious why. And then we also know, you mentioned on the podcast, there's fantastic educational institutions that train doctors. There's fantastic nurses. There's loving, caring people. There's some of the best technology in the world. There's, billions upon billions a year spent in drug research. So there's all this incredible money and effort and care put in the system. And yet it's failing. It's failing us to create health. So what are we missing here? Right. So that was kind of where that question started. And I thought the placebo effect really opened up that. And I think as I look at one of the flaws of the medical disease care system is they say, if it's not matter, it doesn't matter, right? If it's not physical, they just kind of ignore it.
Right.
So when you give someone a sugar pill and you say, well, it has every effect on the body. Well, aside from the fact that sugar is poison, but that's another standpoint there. But if you give someone an inert pill, you say, take this, it should have absolutely zero effect on the body. But 30% up to 80% can get better just taking a sugar pill. So what do we know? Well, maybe everything that's in that sugar pill isn't the only thing that matters. Right. What we learned through some of the studies is the empathy of the doctor matters. The ability to ask questions, the power of the patient to feel understood, the power of the doctor, the coach, or the practitioner to ask questions to really get at the root issue matters. The amount of belief or trust the patient has in it matters. So these are, great and powerful things. In fact, depend on the study, a placebo is roughly equal to an antidepressant. Some are a little bit better, some are a little bit worse. But it's that feeling of when you talk to a good friend and you just feel better after talking to them, mm-hmm. right? We all know that feeling, right? Now, do we call that the placebo effect, or we call it just being a good friend?
Right.
You can call it, we can call it whatever we want, but what it invites us to look at, I think, is an intervention that costs nothing, where 30% or more of the patients get better just doing it. So right. How can we lean into that? How can we do more of that? And as practitioners or healers or coaches, how can we use our empathy, our care, our ability to ask questions to set our clients and patients up to succeed, recognizing that if we do that well, we can help 30% or more get better before we get into the intervention. Because basically, we're working beyond the physical. We're working on that spiritual, mental, and emotional plane at that point.
Right. Absolutely. So the placebo effect is such an interesting topic for me. I remember I've read a few studies now that, and some of them have really stood out over the years. Yeah. And in one of them, it was a study to examine different ways of doing knee surgery. And so they had the old way of doing knee surgery, which was fairly invasive. And then they had this new way of doing knee surgery through a laparoscopic surgery, which was going to be less invasive. And then they needed to compare those two to essentially what was the placebo effect, which was a sham knee surgery. And so they had their study group and they split it into thirds, and 1/3 got the old knee surgery. These were all patients who needed basically knee surgery of some kind. I think it was a tendon repair or something of that nature. So one group had the old surgery, one group received the new surgery, and then the placebo group received this sham surgery, because part of it is the patient cannot know that they're getting a placebo.
Sure.
And so what they did was they, cut the incisions as if that group had had the knee surgery, but didn't do anything, just made incisions and then closed them back up, told them they'd had, knee surgery, asked them to report on how they were feeling. And amazingly, the group who had the sham knee surgery did the best of all three groups. And when they looked at the long-term effects of the knee surgery, those patients who received the sham knee surgery, who had nothing done whatsoever, had the longest lasting pain-free years. And so that really stood out to me. First of all, of how many people are getting knee surgeries that really actually don't work any better than a placebo. Yeah. But then how many people healed simply because they believed they would heal, which really tells you amazingly about how the mind contributes to the body's healing process, and both for the positive and the negative, because the other study that I remember reading that really sparked my interest was a group of patients receiving chemotherapy. And of course, they compared them to a placebo group, and the patients were told they were receiving chemotherapy, but they were not. And even in that group that they were not receiving real chemotherapy, they still lost their hair. A lot of patients still lost their hair because they expected to lose their hair on chemotherapy. So it tells you how your mind influences how your body heals or detriments completely, right? So can you talk to us a little bit about that and the role the mind plays in the body's healing, and what optimal health could look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you bring up that first study. The doctor did it was Bruce Moseley. So I write about it in my book, interestingly enough. So, and just to put some context around it, like you said, it was a knee surgery. They were looking at two different types. I believe it was for arthritis or cartilage repair, and they were looking at shaving off the knee joint or flushing it. Those were the two types of interventions, just like you said, and the third one was a placebo. Interestingly enough, he was the doctor for the Houston Rockets, the NBA team.
Okay.
And he was also an Olympic team doctor. So at the end of this, he said, so he was like a well-renowned knee surgeon. So this wasn't like an average run-of-the-mill. This guy was like renowned orthopedic surgeon. And he said he had to look at the end that all of his skill as a surgeon really meant nothing, because the patients, were doing the same or not as well, as you were saying, as the placebo group.
Right.
So for him, that was a real kind of gut check. And I highlighted that one in the book. One, because it was very impactful for me, like you described, but two, is we think of a placebo having to do with a pill to take. But the idea of a placebo surgery really opens this up to a whole new level. So I tell the story in a chapter I call the quantum principle, which is, the subtitle for that chapter is The Power of Nothing, but it's the power of no hyphen thing.
Yeah.
Or this idea. And I start out the chapter telling the story of when I was in fifth grade, I had to build a model of an atom. So it was that little, an atom, if you remember from like elementary school or high school, you got a nucleus in the center with a protons and neutrons that build it up. And then you have rings of electrons around it. You had to build a model and bring it in. So I did. But what I found out is, that model of the atom wasn't true. And why does that matter? Well, that atom is the building block of everything in the universe.
Right.
So the computer we're talking on, the table, the chairs, the cars, they're all built out of these little atoms, basically the little Legos of the world. But it's based on something called atomic theory, which is the theory of an atom. But it's not called atomic fact, because it is still a theory on kind of how the atom works, amazingly. What I end up learning is so that was kind of the old physics, the Newtonian physics. The new one is kind of quantum physics. So what's different about the atom in old school physics, Newtonian versus quantum physics? Well, in quantum physics, the atom still exists, but relative to the size of the neutron, the neutron's the size of a mini basketball, which is kind of what I used when I was in fifth grade.
Sure.
The closest electron might be 4 or 5 miles away.
Wow.
So it's incredible, right? So like if it was the size of a kernel, it would be 2 football fields over.
Wow.
Like just to give some idea of the scale of an atom. So what we learn is the atom is actually 99.996% empty space. Although it's actually not empty, it's full of energy. So this is this quantum idea that actually what we're made up of isn't little Legos, but little dense pieces of energy, which is basically that quantum model of what an atom is. So how does that matter to us? Well, our body's made of atoms, our organs made of atoms, our world's made of atoms. So the question is, are we made of tiny Legos or are we made of energy?
Right.
Right. And I think the answer is what I liked about the some of the studies on placebo, and specifically that one on arthritis of the knee with Dr. Mosley, is it provides some really great scientific validation of, hey, what matters here isn't the physical, it's the energetic. And in fact, like you said, it's actually those energetic dynamics that are actually more important than the physical. One other example I like around that is, I don't necessarily like it, but around heart attacks and people who lose loved ones. We may have heard a story or know someone who knows someone who, the husband died and then the wife died 2 days later, or vice versa. And what they found is, after the death of a loved one, the risk of a heart attack goes up 1,800%.
Wow.
And it's an elevated risk for the next 6 months. So did their cholesterol level change markedly at that moment? Probably not. Right? Did the inflammatory markers, was there physical changes we can create? Did their diet suddenly change? No, but but energetically, there was a major shock or stressor in some people that happens at that moment. And can that have ripples? It's like, that's the pebble that drops in the body. And then we can see the ripples show up. But the key is, are we looking at the ripples or are we looking for the pebble? And I think that energetic domain is a really, really powerful pebble to look at, and very, very often ignored in kind of traditional medical care.
Absolutely. So having this information of the energetic impact on health, what does that mean for people in their healing journey and what their healing journey can look like? So for people who are dealing with some sort of health issue today, whatever that is for them, how can they begin to influence their health for the better?
Good. Yeah. So let's kind of get practical on how we can apply this, is kind of what I'm hearing you're saying. That's an awesome question.
Yeah.
So one of the first ways to do this, and I'd encourage everyone to do this, is when you start to have a condition, whatever it is, whether it's high blood pressure, whether it's pain in your knee, whether it's a headache, whatever's going on, I really encourage you to look at, when exactly did the condition begin, right? A really simple question. And then look at what was going on just prior to that, right? And what we're looking for is a change. I have a real simple rule that every effect has a cause. The fire truck's going by. I have a real simple rule that every effect has a cause. So if we start seeing an effect show up in the body, we can look for the cause. But what we can do is not just look at change of diet, not just look for a recent injury, but we can look for a stressor. We can look for a family dynamic. We can look at a breakup. We can look at a new job. You can look for those energetic stressors, just kind of spot where it's coming from and give us some clues on it. That's one thing. A second thing we could do is, and this is going to be really simple, but really powerful, and I'll kind of explain that, is just when you wake up in the morning, ask yourself the question, describe my mood level, and just name the mood level you're in. What they found is people who are optimistic, or kind of on the positive side of life, can live 7 to 15 years longer than those who are pessimistic. Wow. And this is incredibly powerful, because things like exercise, normal blood pressure, normal cholesterol, that's what I might consider normal cholesterol, and what your doctor might consider normal cholesterol would be a very different story.
For sure.
But normalizing those factors, wearing a seatbelt, will increase your lifespan somewhere between 1 to 5 years. So we're talking about an intervention on a mood level that's 2 to 5 times more powerful than some of the stuff that the doctor is literally asking you about on every visit.
Right. Wow.
And one interesting, yeah. And just looking at that, and then one piece on that, and this doesn't mean like you wake up and you tell yourself you're happy every day, even if you're pissed off at the world.
Right.
Sometimes the answer is pissed off at the world or angry or upset. But just naming the mood level is incredibly powerful.
Wow.
And I'll give you one example on that. There was a functional MRI study that did out of UCLA. And what they were doing is looking at parts of the brain. And they were looking at which parts of the brain lit up when somebody was shown different pictures. So if they were shown pictures of, love or animals or beaches, the happy part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, would come up, and you'd see this kind of response of like calm and peace in the body. And where images of violence or war or killing were showed, then you'd see a firing in a part of the brain called the amygdala, which is associated with fear and stress in the sympathetic nervous system. So they would show these images and see a really consistent effect. Then the researchers did something interesting, which is they asked the patients to name the mood level they were feeling. And what they found is when the people were shown the images of war and killing and violence, when they name the mood level they feel, I feel scared, I feel anger, I feel, hopeless, whatever that mood came up, what they found is a shift at that moment in the functional MRI between the fear part of the brain to the rational part of the brain, basically from the stress system to the more calming, relaxing parasympathetic system.
Wow.
And when I think about that, I think it has to do with, you can't describe your house while you're locked in the bathroom.
Right.
Right? You're locked in the bathroom. So you can't stay stuck in the anxiety and describe the anxiety.
Right.
You almost have to step out of it, kind of look at it from a distance, being able to, look at it, feel it, touch it, and describe it. And you almost have to step outside of that. And I think as soon as you step outside of it, you can feel that difference in your body. And amazingly and incredibly and awesomely, they can see that show up in changes in the functional MRI.
How cool.
So there's more we can go into, but there's a couple things that I think are like really, just great take homes and practical steps on how I think that matters.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'd love to dive into that deeper. I wanted to hit on that before we did that idea of expressing your emotion. I talked about this, I think, on our Keys. It was either our Keys to Longevity podcast or the there was how to prevent, emotional stress from impacting your health. We did an episode on that too. And I talked about a research study I had read in which people who suppressed their emotions had more severe, worse health outcomes than people who were able to feel and express their emotions. And so it was a really interesting study where people who chronically suppressed their emotions, whether most often what people are suppressing is, anger, frustration, sadness, because they want to put on a happy face for the world, or because they're not allowed to express those emotions around whoever they're around. But sometimes, even thinking about kids when they're really excited, a lot of times parents will be like, calm down. It's from the time that we're little, or you're having a tantrum and your parents are like, cut it out, knock it off. It's almost like we're taught from the time that we're born to suppress our emotions instead of learning how to properly and appropriately express them in the moment. And so in this study, they found that people who they had people who were undergoing various cancer treatments, and individuals who suppressed their emotions chronically also suppressed their immune system and overall had worse outcomes. They had less healing. They lived shorter periods of time. They may have had no effect at all from the chemotherapy versus people who were able to express their emotions, feel their emotions in a healthy way. And I thought that was so impactful of what I had learned from it is when you suppress your emotions, you suppress your immune system and you suppress your body from being able to heal properly. And so I think what you're saying is just such a testament to that, of just being able to simply name the emotions you're feeling, which is a way of dealing with it, right? As opposed to waking up and being in a terrible mood and saying, nope, I'm fine, and we do it all the time. People are like, how are you doing? Great. Even if you're doing horrible, like, we suppress it all the time. So the simple step of waking up in the morning and saying, you know what, I'm feeling really frustrated. I'm feeling stressed out. I have this talk coming up at work that I don't feel prepared for, or I'm feeling agitated, or I'm still mad at my spouse from a fight we had last night. Like, just naming those emotions and allowing yourself to even just spend a second recognizing them. What a powerful effect that can have on your health. That's incredible.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. So naming it's the first step, and then you kind of led to the next step. So once that emotion's named, some of the questions I like are, let's say, pick a mood you may not want to experience. What would be a good example we can use for the podcast?
Frustration.
Great. So then, the questions that I would ask the client in that part is, what part of frustration are you willing to experience? And have them tell me about it. And then what part of frustration would you rather not experience? And you kind of work through those questions back and forth until you can feel a relief, a sense of lightness. And then I would ask, what part of frustration are you willing to create? Some people maybe create, why the heck would I ever want to create frustration? But we may have the frustration of going for a big goal. We may have a frustration of going for promotion. We have a frustration of going to the gym. We may have a frustration of children, right? There's parts of frustration we may actually want to create.
Right.
And then what part of frustration would you rather not create? And asking those questions back and forth to do exactly what you said, kind of lean into it. And then in addition, I think even more important to that is looking at what's the opposite positive of frustration. So let's say someone says it's ease or lightness or fun. So what part of ease are you willing to experience? What part of ease would you rather not experience? And then what part of ease would you rather create and not create? Those are some real practical questions that someone can journal. Sometimes they're better to talk through someone with like a good friend or a coach, but can really start unburdening those chronic moods and encourages you, invites the person to experience that, to allow those emotions, that frustration, whatever it is, to turn on, lean into it. So then that mood isn't stuck here being resisted. And it's like, I'm not feeling frustration, but the whole time it's like 2 inches from your face and you're using all your effort to not feel it.
Right.
Right. And you're like, well, you don't look particularly high. I'm fine, or whatever the case may be. But can we experience the frustration, allow it to arrive and allow it to move right through and save all that energy, what we're doing from suppressing it, to just be here. And to your point on cancer patients, there's a couple of studies that show the balance of the person's autonomic nervous system, so the stress and relaxation system, or the parasympathetic and sympathetic, but that automatic nervous system, how well balanced it is, how well it is balanced between a state of ease and stress, it can go back and forth, is more important predictor in cancer survival rate than the stage of the cancer.
Really?
Which means cancer stage 1, 2, 3, or 4. 4 means it's metastasized and you have bad news. But you can actually look at the balance of someone's nervous system. It can be a better predictor of cancer.
Wow.
There's a gentleman named Nick Gonzalez who passed away a few years ago and in some curious circumstances. But he ran a very large cancer clinic up in New York, and he's a medical doctor. And I think he worked with over 6,000 patients and specialized in pancreatic cancer. But how he worked with, he had a protocol of how he worked with his cancer patients, but the most important thing he said was he did everything by balancing the autonomic nervous system. And he said if somebody's more sympathetic or parasympathetic, they'll have different types of cancer. And he had 10 individualized diets based around balancing the autonomic nervous system, recognizing that certain nutrients calmed and certain nutrients calmed us down, kind of pressed the brake, and certain nutrients kind of sped us up and revved us up and pressed the gas. And I say that to your story on cancer, and to add, in addition to that he found that foundational and the most important thing, one of his 3-4 tenets on it, but he found that absolutely critical, that if you didn't get that autonomic nervous system or automatic nervous system balanced, that he wasn't able to help patients nearly as effective as he was. And he had, incredible success rates. And he published a lot of the research, and he was able to do that based on an application of exactly what we're talking about right here.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So
it's really a great testament to that.
So tie us back into our discussion now on the placebo effect and what that tells us about optimal health. And now we've, kind of dived into these energetic states. How does this all circle back?
So what it circles back is to when we're looking at a physical issue, when we're looking at knee pain, are we seeing it as a knee issue? Are we believing the x-ray? The doctor pointed it. You see that? Bone on bone. Nothing you can do about it. Yeah. And statistically, there is a radiologist cannot predict your pain level, which means you can look at someone's x-ray and have no idea what level of pain they're in.
Right.
If it's bone on bone or if it's not bone on bone. And the thing that always gets me is people say it's bone on bone and say, okay. And then I have pain 3 times a week. So are you telling me the other 4 days a week it's not bone on bone?
Right.
So are we having like some small like inflatable cushions that go in there and separate it, or you're like hanging from like a bar, like right? But it's like, I get pain, really bad in the morning. It's like, or I get pain twice a week. It's like, oh, but my left knee is getting old. It's like, well, how old's your right knee?
Right.
Roughly, about the same age, right? So it's like we ascribe it just because we can see it. And in chiropractic, we were taught in school, oh, look, the person has a herniated disc. That's the cause of their back pain. But if you look at it, it's like 80% of people over 80 have herniated discs. And it's like 20% of the people who are 20 years old have herniated discs.
Wow.
Or,
yeah.
It might be a little high, but the point is there's a lot of asymptomatic herniated discs out there.
Right.
But if you take the X-ray, the MRI in that case, and you see a herniated disc, then you can easily point to and say, that's the cause of your back pain. But are we saying it just developed that quickly? And are we sure that's the cause of the pain?
Right.
Right. I mean, it's an easy thing to point to, but it prioritizes or puts way too much emphasis on the physical. So I think looking at some of the things we're talking about, things that seem a little different, a little woo-woo, like mood level, like when exactly to begin, kind of exploring stressors, can have a very beneficial effect at looking at someone's health. And what that means is waking up in the morning and asking yourself to describe your mood level, or doing a meditation, or starting your day with gratitude can be more important and more valuable to your health than taking a blood pressure medication, or even better, taking a combination of Hawthorne and some other things that you talked about in your last podcast. But it can be even more valuable than that, because what happens is the energetic realm and domain is the pebble. The physical changes are the ripples.
Cool.
So the question is, are we working on the pebble that dropped in there, or are we just watching ripples?
Right.
And I think that's really the question to ask. And, working with a practitioner who understands that and can help you with that, and just appreciating that in your own life, will have a dramatic impact in your health. And I think that's one of the foundational principles of health that I try to communicate to all my patients.
Absolutely. Do you have any success stories you could share with us? Any people that you've worked with that you've kind of implemented this deeper level of healing with, where they've experienced the life-saving benefits of it, or the healing benefits of it?
Fortunately, tons. I'll share a couple briefly with you that are just really struck me as amazing. I was working with a mother who lived down in Mexico, and she breastfed her son. And then when her daughter was born, was not able to breastfeed, went to see the doctor, and they said they had some fibrosis building up in the breast, and she wasn't able, and they said clogged ducts, and they had to do a surgery to clean it up. And they said, because of that, you will not be able to breastfeed. So, 4 or 5 months into pregnancy, she hadn't been able to breastfeed. We worked with her one day pretty profoundly on the identity or the role of mother, and some of her moods and emotions she felt around that, which not all of them were positive, and some of them were connected to, things she learned from her mother and her grandmother. And so she worked through a lot of that. And I got a call the next day, 2 days later, and she was angry at me. She was like, my breast really hurt. What the heck happened? 2 days later, she said, I'm going to go to the doctor and get it checked out. I said, okay, I could do that. 2 days later, she's breastfeeding her son.
Wow.
Something the medical doctor told her was impossible. And she was, I think it was 4 to 6 months into pregnancy. But the point is, she was well into pregnancy, and it had been impossible for that period of time. I've seen it happen with, and you could go on and on with lovely stories around weight loss, around psoriatic arthritis, around a whole host of other things, but really looking at some of those, around headaches all the time, but really looking at those underlying emotions and seeing where are they kind of pressing on the body and helping it to unlock it's a lot of fun and incredibly powerful. And I think really rewarding for the patient, and I think the practitioner to see that as well.
That's really cool. One of the chiropractors that I see, Dr. Hannah, she works on something she calls neuro-emotional technique, where we work with,
Sure.
yeah, we work with tracing things back to emotional roots. And I started seeing her probably about 8 months before I was able to get pregnant. So I'd been just over 2 years of my husband and I trying to get pregnant. And I actually went to her for one thing, which was a special type of therapy she offered called Mercier therapy, which helps break up scar tissue. And while we were doing that, she said, you know, I also offer this neuro-emotional technique. I'd like to try it out with you because sometimes infertility can have emotional roots. You know, there could be ways of thinking that are keeping us from getting pregnant. And at that point, you know, you will try anything. So I was like, yeah, absolutely. Let's try it. And it's just interesting you sharing that story. I ended up having a lot of fears about becoming a mother that I didn't even realize I had, you know, down to as small of things as not being able to control the world my child is being born into. And sometimes being in the functional medicine world like we are, you almost know too much. You know what I mean? And you do sort of feel like there's just between the environment our child is going to be born into is so filled with toxins. And you know, I had some fears about that, of not being able to control what happened to them, and even down to stupid things as like, you know, I can help them have a healthy diet, but what happens when they go to a friend's house and they're going to eat junk food and they're going to get sick? Things like that were actually part of my body shared that those were things that were keeping me from being able to get pregnant, because I had anxiety over what would happen once I had a child. And then even down to insecurities about myself as a mother. Will I be a good mother? Which is something a lot of people are afraid of. But for me, dealing with those emotions, dealing with those negative thoughts really did help open the door to becoming pregnant, because they were things that in a way my body was thinking, well, you have all this fear about becoming pregnant. And so it didn't feel safe to actually become pregnant. And once we worked through those thoughts and those emotions, and Dr. Hannah helped me with some techniques for dealing with them, and, you know, allowing myself to feel them in a healthy way, recognize what they were, and then, you know, also move past them. It did really, that was one of the things that I feel like helped open the door for us. So I'm a total believer in that.
Yeah, and that's a great example, and thanks for sharing. And simply what that is any kind of fear and anxiety. It's just intention to get pregnant, counter intention, oh my God, what will happen if?
Right.
Right? And what happens is you want something really bad, but you also have some fear, nervousness, anxiety around the same thing. And guess what? You're slamming the gas, trying to go towards your goal, and you're slamming the brake at the same time. And what happens? You're not moving, you're stuck, you're spinning your wheels, and you may have bounced from doctor to doctor and thing to thing, looking for the solution to that, when actually you found, oh, I'm jamming the gas and the brake at the same time.
Right.
Right? That's what's burning up the engine, right? That's why we're not going forward to where we want to go. Yeah, it's just, it's amazing to see those kind of apparent contradictions, but can be very real. I mean, fear and anxiety is real. And I'd say everyone learning, I mean, every mother can resonate with the story you just told. Probably every father can resonate with the story you just told, right? But the point is, anyone trying anything new, we all go through these. That's the beginning of learning anything. You put me in front of a guitar, I'm going to go through fear and anxiety and nervousness and unknowns and stupidity and confusion, right? Just like if you took me to a cricket game or, all kinds of different things that I just don't know a lot about, or you asked me to fix a car, right? But can we go through that? Can we allow ourselves to go through it? Because the only way to grow in that game, just like you and I have learned in the nutrition area, is we were probably pretty stupid at it at the beginning, right? And that's kind of, you had 3 years of stupidity. I had 10 years of stupidity. So you're much wiser than I am. But we have to allow ourselves to go through that. And the question is, can we experience it? Can we allow it to turn on? And can we work through it? Or are we the effect of it? Right. And I think that's what these examples invite us to do, is realize, can we be honest about what we're going through? Can we allow ourselves to experience it? And then can we open ourselves to the possibility of growing through that and what comes next?
I love that. And we've already covered so much ground here, and you've already given our listeners several steps that they could take today. Are there any other steps, anything else that you would invite somebody to try as they're navigating their healing process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That could be another 6 hours of
Right, right.
podcast. But I think to bring this, I'll close it with one other fact. There was a guy named McClure at Oxford University, and what he was looking at is what has more powerful effects on the body, physical interventions or non-physical interventions. So physical are things like hormones, vitamins, minerals, stuff you can touch, stuff you can find, you can poke. Or he looked at energetic stimuli, which is, you ever walk into a party and see someone across the room and then just get sick to your stomach or just want to walk the other way or start sweating, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think you and your audience can probably already guess where we're going, but what he found is the body was up to 100 times more sensitive to non-physical stimuli, to energetic stimuli than it was to physical stimuli.
Wow.
So the question is, when we walk in that room, what's more important? Is it that person across the room or the piece of cheese we ate? Either one could have given us possibly bloating or gas or whatever that is, or the food we ate. But I really encourage just opening that mind to that. And if that's something that interests your audience, or they'd like to go deeper, I'd like to invite them, to do that. I've written a book, Timeless Youth, and I encourage them to pick it up. It'll go deep into what we talked about today. It'll give the example of the study by Dr. Mosley, and really go deep into kind of some of the practical applications and really the main principles of health. And the idea behind it was, how could we give someone a mindset shift in health, right? To really see the medical care system for exactly what it is, which is a disease care system, which can be super useful at the right time, but be 100% clear what it's not doing, which is creating health.
Right.
And how can we use that to find the right supplements, to find the right food, to find the right interventions, physical and non-physical. So that was the purpose I wrote the book, and I wrote it for you, years ago at the beginning of that journey, when you would have given anything to save yourself 3 years and $10,000 to find out what was going on. I wrote it for me, or really my parents, when I was 6 years old, and you're just grasping for straws, trying all kinds of crazy stuff. And, I remember sleeping with magnets in my pillow for, 10 years and, thinking that was helpful. You're just trying stuff, and it may have helped, who knows, but that's the one thing I think of. It's just one of the examples, just crazy stuff you try to make it work. But I think if we can understand, you cannot be sick and healthy at the same time, right? That's just like, by definition, you can't be sick and healthy. So you can either focus all your time on treating the sickness, or you can focus your time on creating health.
Yeah.
And I'd invite the audience to read the book, buy it for friends, and focus their attention on creating health, because every step you create towards health is a step you're taking away from disease and sickness.
Absolutely. So for those of you, if you missed it, the book is called Timeless Youth. Does it say by Dr. Jeff Crippen on it too then?
Yep, it does, by Dr. Jeff Crippen. And one thing exciting to share is it just got published. It's coming out officially in October in Spanish, but I just got the first copies.
All right.
2 days ago. So, Tu Eterna Juventud. You speak Spanish or would like to, or have some friends that do, it's now available in Spanish as well.
That's awesome. That's amazing. So for sure, I will link that book in the show notes. And where is it available through? Is it available through Amazon or anywhere else online?
Yep, Amazon. We have timelessyouthbook.com. You can get it there, and also anywhere books are sold. If they don't have it in stock, you can just ask them if you have a favorite local bookseller you'd like to support. They can order it, and you can get it from any bookstore, including Amazon online.
And I want to get more of your contact information for our listeners too. Do you see people virtually? It kind of sounded like you did, since you worked with a mother in you said Mexico. So how do you see people virtually? How do people reach out to you? How do they find you?
Yeah, great. Happy to help anyone. Probably an easy way to do is find me on Instagram. You can just send me a direct message there, Jeff Crippen, which I'm sure you'll link to there. Or you can find us through the book website, timelessyouthbook.com. You can message through there. So either one of those places are great opportunities to find us. And if we can answer some questions, happy to do that. If you'd like to explore a more deeper healing relationship, I'm happy to do that as well, or support you on what you're already doing. So you can reach out either way there.
Awesome. That's amazing. Is there anything we haven't covered on this topic that you would like to talk about with us today?
Yeah, I think, probably a lot because I think we can go a lot deeper, but I
I
really
think so. We could have a couple episodes. We might have you back on again.
Yeah, which would be great. But I really think we put a really good overview on it. I like some of the places we went. I think you asked some great questions in the context we put around it and the practical things. So I feel pretty good about what we touched on today. So thank you for the questions and guiding us.
Amazing. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jeff, for being on our podcast today. This really was such a cool conversation for me. I mean, I can nerd out about this all day long, and hopefully our audience, you gain something from it too. I think, it reaffirms information we've shared in other podcasts. And I know you commented some of the stuff might seem kind of woo-woo. And something I remember Dr. Cody said, the dentist that I started seeing when I first went to him, he said something that has always stuck out to me that I totally agree with is the deeper he's gotten into understanding the healing processes of the body, the more he's learned, the more woo-woo something sounds, the more likely it is to be real. Yeah. He's like, those are the things that I've started to be drawn to more and more now, because the more I learn about them, the more I realize how true those things really are, how real they really are. And, it's a shame that in our world today, it's considered quackery or false science or whatever you want to call it, when in reality, it's the key to our healing journey. It just doesn't make anybody money. And so it gets dismissed, right?
If that's you, I just like to say chapter 4 and chapter 5 of the book will really kind of resonate. If those are like topics you want to nerd out on or go deeper on or kind of explore more of our conversation, we really touched a lot about chapters 4 and 5. So that's you. If Elaine, you just described who you are, those would be a couple chapters to really start with there, because I think you'll really enjoy them.
I love that. Well, we will put a link to Timeless Youth in our show notes, so you can check that out there. And then be sure to find Dr. Jeff on Instagram. You said it's, is it Jeff Crippen or Dr. Jeff Crippen?
Just Jeff Crippen.
Jeff Crippen. So I'll find you and I'll link you there too. And gosh, thanks again so much for this amazing conversation. It was such a fun treat to have you on the show today. And for our listeners, thank you so much for listening in, and go be renegades.
Thank you for listening to the Renegade Nutrition Podcast.
Please keep in mind that this podcast is an educational service that provides general health information. The content on this podcast is not a substitute for direct, personal, professional medical care and diagnosis. You should always talk to your doctor before making a dietary or lifestyle change. Go be renegades!
Go be renegades!